This video is brought to you by Sailrite. Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions. In this tutorial video, we're going to show you how to replace the fabric panels in a Sling swing. This is a two-person swing that includes sling panels that have a padded center for the backrest and the seat bottom. We will be using a premium mesh fabric called Phifertex Plus, which is available in solid colors or stripes. This is what it looks like after we're done replacing the old fabric. Here's what used to be on the swing. You can tell the fabric has faded greatly compared to the back side and the front side, and it's starting to fall apart, the stitches are, that is. Let's get started and show you how to replace the fabric on your Sling swing. This video concentrates on making the fabric replacement panels, not necessarily on disassembling the chair, but here are a few clips of us disassembling it. The fabric for the seat bottom has ripped out completely, though the fabric for the seat back is still intact, which is usually the case. We are disassembling the channels from the frame and keeping all of our components so we can reassemble it. This is the channel that contains the backrest, which is still intact. If it's difficult to remove, you can use vice grips or pliers to pull it from the channel. Ours is rather easy to remove. Sling chairs have a sleeve with a cording that runs in a channel, as seen here. You can really see the fading that happened with this inferior fabric. If you use Phifertex Plus from Sailrite, this will not happen for many years. We'll need to order fabric from Sailrite. We need to measure the frame to determine how much fabric is required. Both our backrest and seat bottoms are the same size frame, so we only need to measure one. For our height measurement, it's 20 inches, and for our width measurement, we have 40 inches. We can use those measurements to determine how much Phifertex Plus or Phifertex stripe material that we need. Our sling panels have a foam insert on the inside, so there's a back side and a front side, so each panel takes two rectangles. Remember that we have a seat and a backrest, so we'll actually need 4 panels of this fabric. Here are the calculations to determine how much Phifertex material that we need. The mesh material we're using is 54 inches wide. We need 44 inches in width, so we're good there. For the height, we need a total of 88 inches divided by 36, and we need about 3 yards of fabric. To pick your fabric, visit the Sailrite website. Hover over Fabric and click on Mesh Fabric. Narrow your search results on the left-hand column by picking Phifertex Plus and Phifertex Stripes. These are the fabrics that we recommend for the two-person Sling swing. We'll use the old fabric to cut the new fabric. That's next. We've removed the old sling fabric from the chair. We're going to use it to measure for the new one. Here we're using awls and hammering them into the table with the fabric pulled taut. You can do this with a second helper as you measure the width instead of using awls if you like. Here we get 40.5 inches. That's the finished width after the sleeves are completed. So we'll write that down on paper. It's a good idea to measure both the top and bottom edges to make sure there's no additional shape in the chair. Typically there's not. The bottom is 40.5 inches as well. Now we're measuring the height and confirming that it's the same across the width in 3 separate locations. It's 19.5 inches. We'll write that down as well. We will open up a corner of the sleeve here with a seam ripper ripping out the stitches. Doing this will enable us to measure what the sleeve measured. It measures 1.5 inches. To our finished width, we need to add 1.5 inches twice, so we get 43.5 inches for the cut size of our back panel. Now we'll rip some stitches at the top where the front panel was sewn to the back panel. Now with this open, we can measure the hem at the top edge. It should be the same at the bottom edge as well, so we won't open it up there. We get a 1/2 inch here, but we're going to add 1 inch for a hem allowance. So our finished height is 19.5 plus 1 inch plus another 1 inch, and that equals 21.5 inches. So for the back panel, we'll cut it 21.5 by 43.5. At the middle position of this back panel, there is a sleeve for awning sling cord. It measures 19.5 inches in height and it is 1 inch wide, folded in half. So we'll cut a strip that is 2 inches plus 19.5 plus 1 inch. They used a 1/2 inch hem at the top and the bottom, but we're going to do 1 inch hem. So 2 inches by 21.5. We'll cut a strip to make that sleeve. Now we know what to cut for the center sleeve and the back panel. Now let's concentrate on the front panel that's been sewn to the back panel. We're going to rip a few stitches to look at the hem on the front panel. They used a 1/2 inch hem allowance around the perimeter. We're going to use a 1 inch hem allowance. So now we'll measure the front panel from where it's been sewn, the height and also the width. Remember, there's a padding inside this front panel, so it stands a little bit proud. We're going to get a measurement of 38 3/4. Looks like 38.5, but since the material's standing proud, it's more like 38 3/4. So to the 38 3/4, we'll add 2 inches for our 1 inch hem, making it 40 3/4 by 21.5. That's the cut size of our front panel. Now, after all those calculations and we have it marked down on our paper, we can cut our fabric to size. We love using the clear acrylic ruler. First, we need to take our fabric and mark a straight line along the cut edge that came from Sailrite, making sure that edge is perfectly straight. It will not be straight from Sailrite. We're using the stripes in the fabric to determine whether or not the clear acrylic ruler is laying straight along that edge. Then we marked it and we cut it to size with scissors. We're using the Scriball pencil in a black color to mark this fabric, which works perfect for Phifertex fabric like this. We also have a Scriball pencil in white for other colors. The Phifertex Plus mesh fabric is 54 inches in width, and for this panel we need it to be 43.5 inches, so we're marking the fabric and we'll cut it to that size. Since our fabric is a striped fabric, we can cut right along that stripe, and that will keep our line nice and straight, though we did mark it with that Scriball pencil as well. Next, we'll cut out that sleeve we need for the center of the back panel, which I believe is 2 inches by 21.5 inches. And we'll cut out the forward panel as well. We will not show that. Be sure to mark the forward and back panel with masking tape as we did here, so you do not get confused when you go to fabricate them. Now that our fabric is cut to size, it's now time to add the hems and sleeves. We're going to use our paper that we wrote on as a reference for that. We'll start with the back panel. Along the 2 long edges, we'll add 1 inch for a hem, and on the 2 short sides, we'll add 1.5 inches for a sleeve. We'll be using the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler to mark a line that is 2 inches from the raw edge of the fabric. We're going to use our black Scriball pencil in the 2-inch hole. This strikes a line that's 2 inches from the raw edge of the fabric, so that when we fold that raw edge down to that line, it'll equal a 1-inch hem. Do the same thing on the opposite long edge of the back panel. On the 2 short sides, we need to create a 1.5-inch sleeve, so we placed our Scriball pencil in the 3-inch hole of the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler and scribe a line there as well. That line will be difficult to see since it's a striped fabric, so here we're just marking it where that stripe would rest, and that way we can just fold the material to the edge of that stripe. This is the back panel. It will contain the Sling chair spline cord that runs into the sleeves. We're going to use seam stick basting tape or double-sided tape for canvas, part number 129, and we're going to run it along the 2 long edges as seen here in the video, fairly close to the edge of the fabric. We're going to use a Sailrite canvas patterning ruler to make sure the seam stick is stuck well to the Phifertex material. Then we're going to pull the backing off, revealing the double-sided tape. Now we will fold the 2 long edges down to the line that we scribed on the material and match up the raw edge of the material to the line that we scribed on it. If it is off, you can rebaste it again. As you can see here, that's the beauty of double-sided tape. We'll use the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler to make sure it's creased well and bound or stuck well to itself. Do the same thing to the opposite long side. And on the edges where we need to create the 1.5-inch sleeve for the Sling chair spline, we're going to place the double-sided tape very close to the raw edge of the fabric on both those short sides. Then we'll peel off the backing and we'll adhere it to the line that is 3 inches from the edge of the fabric. Remember that we can't really see that line well, so we're just using the stripes as a reference here because the stripes kind of hide that pencil line from the scriball pencil. Be sure to do the long edges first, then the 2 short edges. Otherwise, your sling cord will not be able to be run into the back panel. For the front panel that will create the envelope, we need to add a 1-inch hem to the long edges and the short edges. This is the front panel. So here again we're going to use the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler in the 2-inch hole and scribe a line 2 inches from the raw edge. Then we're going to use the double-sided tape, which we did not show, and baste it around the perimeter, starting with the long edges and then finishing with the 2 short edges. Onto the center sleeve, which we have to create for the back panel. On the 2 short edges we will apply double-sided tape and create a 1-inch hem there as well. 1 inch, and on the other short side 1 inch. The hem needs to be placed on the same side of the fabric. There is no right side and wrong side of this Phifertex Plus fabric. Now we will fold that 2-inch strip in half so it equals 1 inch when it's done. We're using the edge of a sharp table to crease the fabric well. Then we're going to sew about 1/8 inch away from the raw edges of the fabric, not where the fold was created, down the length, doing reversing at the beginning and also doing reversing at the end. We are using the Sailrite Ultrafeed LSZ1 sewing machine to sew this. This is a straight stitch and zigzag sewing machine. It's set up in the industrial sewing table with the Workhorse servo motor. Now we have a back and a front panel that can be joined together to create the envelope for our padding. Now we're going to take our back panel and make sure the hems are facing the tabletop. And we're going to measure from edge to edge after the hems have been created and find the exact center. We could just fold the material in half and mark the center, but measuring it works as well. So this is our center position. At this center position is where we want to install that sleeve that we created for the back panel. This is the sleeve that we'll be sewing onto the back panel. Here we're going to scribe a line from top to bottom, even though we could use a stripe as a reference for the center position. Our sling chair spline cording will go inside of this sleeve. So we want to first apply double-sided tape, doesn't matter to which side, but we want to apply it along the edge that does not have the fold, so against the raw edge of this assembly. Peel off the transfer paper. Now we want to baste it to that center position, but we don't want the fold of the sleeve to be right on the center position. We want it to be about 1/4 inch away from it. So now when the cording is inserted in the sleeve, the cording will basically be at the center position. Whether you baste it on the right side or the left side of the center mark does not really matter, just that 1/4 inch does. And we're using our stripes as a reference to keep it straight. Now if you don't have a stripe material, you may need to mark a line along the raw edge of this sleeve to make sure it stays straight. Here I'm lifting up the folded edge to make sure it's approximately 1/4 inch away from the center position, which it is. So it's perfect. Now we'll take it over to the sewing machine and we'll scroll up one edge so that we can sew that sleeve at the center of this back panel. We will start sewing at the top edge, doing some reversing to lock our stitch well in place, and we're basically sewing on top of the previous stitches that secured this sleeve in place. We are using the Sailrite Lifetime thread, formerly known as Profilin PTFE thread, which is a lifetime guaranteed thread, and chemicals do not affect it, and the sun does not weaken it over time, so it'll outlast the life of the fabric. If you don't want to spend the money on that, we recommend a V92 polyester thread that's also available from Sailrite. Next, we'll join the front panel to the back panel. The front panel and the back panel will be joined together like this with hems facing each other, so the inside surfaces are facing each other. But before we position them, we're going to take the front panel and flip it so the hems are facing up and apply double-sided tape to the 2 short sides and 1 of the long sides. This is the seam stick for canvas that we recommend, part number 129. We will not apply it to one of the long edges because we still need to insert our stuffing. For us, we're going to be using closed cell foam instead of a compressed polyester because a closed cell foam does not soak up water. Now we'll peel off the transfer paper of the double-sided tape on the 2 short sides and the 1 long side, and be sure to remove our label indicating that this is the back panel and the label or the front panel as well, so that we don't have those on the inside of our fabric assembly. And then we'll flip the panel so that the hems are facing each other, the insides are facing each other, though Phifertex does not have a right side and a wrong side of fabric. We want to center that front panel on the 2 short sides so that the back panel has the same allowance sticking out on the 2 short sides. And then the long edges, they should be matched up perfectly. Our panel is exactly centered, the front panel is centered on the back panel, and the long edges are matched up beautifully, leaving that one edge that doesn't have the double-sided tape open so that we can eventually stick our stuffing into it. Now when we sew these 2 assemblies together, we need to be sure that we don't sew into that sleeve at the center position. So I'm just marking the fabric where I'll be sewing to indicate where I need to stop sewing so I don't accidentally sew that sleeve shut. I'll do some reversing at that juncture. Now we can take it to the sewing machine. Here's the open edge. We don't want to sew that shut, but I do want to start sewing about 2 inches from that open edge and do some reversing here. This creates an envelope for the eventual stuffing of our sling panel. So we did some reversing there, and we will sew around the perimeter, securing the back panel to the front panel. Keeping our stitch approximately 1/8 inch away from the folded edge. No reason to create anything besides a single stitch down the short edge like we just did here. When I get to the corner, I like to bury my needle, lift my presser foot, rotate my fabric assembly, lower my presser foot, and then continue to sew. That creates a perfect 90-degree corner. No reason to do any reversing there. Now as we sew down this long side, we need to stop sewing before we reach the sleeve that was sewn onto the back panel. So there's that sleeve. We don't want to sew through that sleeve because that would make it impossible for us to insert our sling cording. So we'll do some reversing right when we come up to that sleeve to secure our stitch. Then we'll lift our presser foot and push our assembly past that sleeve, and we'll do some reversing on the opposite side of the sleeve. That leaves that little portion unsewn, but you'll notice when the chair is done, it'll still contain the foam very well. We don't have to worry about that little section being unsewn. We get to the corner here, and we'll bury our needle. We'll lift our presser foot and rotate on the needle, lower our presser foot, and continue to sew. Notice that this straight stitch is approximately 1/8 inch away from the folded edge of the forward panel around the perimeter. Now here we are turning the corner to the open edge, and we will sew approximately 2 inches inside that open edge and do some reversing to leave that opening completely open so we can insert our stuff. Here's that middle sleeve that we left unsewn, so we can still get our sling cording inside the sleeve. Usually a padded sling chair or swing in our situation has a compressed polyester fabric in it, as seen below. We're going to use a closed cell foam. A closed cell foam does not soak up hardly any water, whereas a compressed polyester, if it gets wet, it takes hours to dry out. To determine the size of the closed cell foam, measure from the stitch line, as seen here, to the stitch line on the opposite side for the width. We get 38 1/4 from stitch line to stitch line. We'll write that measurement down on paper. Then we want to measure for the height. So the height from stitch line to stitch line for us is 19 inches. We recommend that the closed cell foam be 1.5 inches smaller in both the width and the height measurement. We can mark the closed cell foam again with the black scriball pencil or just a marker. This 1/2 inch closed cell foam cuts easily with scissors. To insert the closed cell foam into the Sling fabric panel, just simply fold it in half, and then once it's inside, just open it up. But you also must push the corners and the edges into or as close to the stitch as possible where the envelope is sewn together. If you don't do this, it will not lay nice and flat. Once it's pushed in, make sure that you feel to confirm that the closed cell foam is laying nice and flat in your assembly, and it's pushed well into the area where the two panels, the back and the front, are sewn together. In an effort to make sewing a little bit easier, we recommend using the seam stick basting tape for canvas along the outside edge that was not yet sewn. So we've applied it on top of that hem and peel off the backing paper. Then we will carefully baste the back panel to the front panel so that the edges are flush. The folded edges are flush. If it's not, you can rebaste it again until it is. Make sure there are no bubbles in the fabric assembly or wrinkles. Now, you do want to apply quite a bit of pressure here because that foam will want to push the assembly apart, and we want it to be basted well. In fact, if it does move on you, you may want to use a stapler and actually staple the two panels together, and then take them to the sewing machine and sew them. That way it won't move at all. Here we will start sewing that edge closed, basically where we stopped sewing the 2 inches when we sewed around the perimeter of the front and back panel, and we will sew very close to the folded edge, about an 1/8 inch away from that edge, doing some reversing at the beginning. Now when we reach the sleeve in the middle position, again we want to do some reversing and not sew through that sleeve. This time the sleeve's on top so we can see it. So we do some reversing there so we don't sew through that sleeve. That would make it impossible for us to insert our cording inside the sleeve. Then we will lift our presser foot and we will push the assembly past the sleeve, and we will do some reversing on the other side of it and sew down it, closing up our sling panel. In preparation of reinstalling this panel into the channel, we will first install our spline cording into the sleeves. We're going to use the old spline cording. If you need new chair spline cording, Sailrite carries it. You'll find that the fabric slides into the rails much easier if you clean the opening of the rail and lubricate it. We love to use McLube. McLube makes things slide beautifully. Here we've sprayed McLube in the rail, and we've also sprayed it on a rag, and we will run the rag up and down in the channel. This cleans and lubricates it so that we can slide the panel much easier into the rail. You may find other spray lubricants that contain Teflon or PTFE. Those work well. We do not recommend using oil as it may attract dirt and may actually get on your clothing when you sit on the sling chair. When inserting the sleeve in the channel, a little trick is to pull the sling cording out slightly, about 1 inch or so, then feed the fabric into the channel, then push the sling cording back into the sleeve all the way. By pulling the cording out from the end of the sleeve, this makes it easier for us to slide that sleeve into the metal channel of the rail. And then once 1 inch or 2 is inserted, we can push that cording back into the sleeve fully, as seen here. The back panel is facing up, and the 3 channels must be fed in to our channels consistently across the width, so we are feeding only a few inches at a time. Once all 3 of the sleeves are inserted in the channel, then we can start pushing or pulling the fabric down the length of the channel. But we need to do that consistently. If you actually pull on one of the sleeves or sling cording channels and insert it deeper than the others, you'll find it impossible to continue pulling the panel on the other 2 rails. So do this consistently across the width, as seen here. This is the backrest. The backrest has channels that are perfectly straight. There's no curve in them. So it's pretty easy to insert. But the seat bottom, which we're going to show in the next chapter, is a little bit more difficult because it has a curve in it. Though the panel for the seat was made exactly the same as the backrest. The measurements were completely the same, but you'll notice that the channels actually have a curve there. Now when we get to the top, it's a little bit more difficult. I can still do it by hand, but if you find that it's very difficult, you can use vice grips, and you can actually protect your fabric with a scrap piece of the Phifertex Plus. We will show that as well. Lubricating the channels, as we did with the McLube, helps a ton. It would be very difficult to pull this in if the channels had not been lubricated. This is one of those jobs where, had I had a second helper to help me hold the frame and pull it in, it would have made it much easier. But I want to show that I can do this on my own as well. So here I'm using some scrap fabric to protect the actual fabric and some vice grips. And I'm using 2 layers. So I have 2 layers on the top and 2 layers on the bottom so that I have extra protection. And then I will tighten up the vice grips till I get a nice firm grip on the fabric. Then I can pull on the fabric, and that will sneak it into position. If I had a second helper, I could have them hold the frame while I use the vice grips. That would make it much easier. We want to do this consistently on each channel, so don't pull one more than the other until you go to the other one. So if you have to remove the vice grips and move it around a little bit until you have it all pulled into place, do that. Don't pull one all the way to the top and then try to work with the middle one or the end one. You'll find that it's very difficult to do unless it's being pulled rather consistently across the width. Okay, we didn't show making the seat bottom panel, but it's made in exactly the same way. In fact, the measurements were exactly the same as the backrest that we did show. So we've already made that panel, and now we're inserting it. The metal channels have been cleaned and lubricated. The seat bottom has some shape in the channels. Notice that the end is actually curved upward. I'm working from the bottom side. In other words, the back panel of this seat bottom is facing up. So here I'm trying to push the fabric to work out wrinkles so it slides into the channels a little bit easier. I'm using a screwdriver to do that. Again, a second helper would help immensely. Because there's a curve, this is obviously more difficult. The fabric wants to wrinkle at that curve. That's why I'm working out the wrinkles as I pull the fabric into the channel. These rails will be tightened up once they are screwed into the actual frame of this swing. So right now they're rather loose. That's why the fabric has quite a few wrinkles in them. Once it is secured into the frame, you'll notice the fabric will tighten up beautifully. Sometimes just by wiggling the fabric and pulling at the same time will allow the wrinkles to be worked out so you can slide the panel in a little bit more easily.
Back and forth.
See all those wrinkles? I'm trying to work those wrinkles out as we pull it into the channel. We're going to show this in double time, and eventually we're going to have to use the scrap fabric with the vice grips. Here I notice that the sling cording inside the sleeves is actually working its way forward. So I'm going to flip the frame and the fabric, and I'm going to use a screwdriver and a hammer to pound the sling cording back into the sleeve. This works really well. There we go. Then we'll continue to work it down. Okay, I don't have a second helper, so I'm going to use my vice grips and my scrap fabric to protect the actual fabric. And I'm going to secure it onto the edge very close to that channel. Then I will work back and forth, pulling a few inches at a time, making sure that I'm pulling it onto the frame consistently along the width. Be sure to position the vice grips with your scrap fabric, of course, very close to the channel so that you get pull close to the sleeve. You don't want it too far from the channel, otherwise you're just pulling on the fabric. Here I finally have a second helper to help feed it into the final position.
There we go. That's perfect. You ready? Not quite. Okay, ready? Yep. Here we go.
All right, now a few jerks
There we go.
and it's in position.
Nice.
We just need to do that in the middle section. We're not going to show that, and our panel is in place. We will reassemble the chair in the reverse order that we disassembled the chair. We're starting with the seat bottom here. We are threading one of the screws and then making sure that several threads are worked into position, but do not tighten down the screw completely. You will find that the Sling fabric with its frame will fit very snugly. In fact, it's nearly impossible to pull it by hand to line up the holes for the bolt. So I'm using a clamp/spreader to do this. So what I'm using is a quick grip spreader and clamp. So this can be turned into a clamp or a spreader. We'll show that a little bit later on. Here we're clamping the assembly so that I can position the hole on the frame over top of the threaded hole on the channel below. Once it's in position, I will thread it into position, but do not tighten it down completely. We need to still insert the middle screw as well. So until all the screws are threaded, about a ½ inch or so into their assembly, we do not want to tighten them down completely. Here I'm going to change my quick grip so that it becomes a spreader rather than a clamp.
Now it's a spreader. And I need to go that way with it. So I'm gonna...
This is being done so that I can position the middle channel over top of the hole for its screw. So now I'm spreading that bar over until I have the two holes lined up. Now I can insert my bolt. Now that all three screws are threaded in position, I can remove my clamp/spreader and tighten down each one of the screws securely all the way. We had to remove the plastic end caps. We had to do that carefully because they're rather brittle since they're old. We need to reinsert them. You may want to spray some lubrication on them before you pound them in place. There is our seat bottom. And this is the area that we're sitting on, and there are no wrinkles in it. It is spread beautifully and tightly across the frame. We'll assemble the seat back in the same manner. It has not yet been tightened up. That's why there are a few wrinkles in it. So we lay it over the top so that the seating surfaces are facing each other. We'll reinsert the bolts and the washers and nuts, and again we will not tighten them down completely until we have all three in position. This frame with bolts helps to tighten up that sling fabric, so it will be very difficult to push this bolt all the way through to get the washer and nut on. So again, I'm going to use my quick grip as a spreader. This will help me to spread that frame closer to the bolt assembly so I can get my washer in place and my nut. The middle channel is not in the correct position, but I can work it in position. Then I'll lift the backrest up so it's almost vertical, and that allows me to insert the bolt.
Perfect.
Now before we tighten those nuts completely, let's start assembling the rest of the chair as it was disassembled. Once we have every nut and bolt in place, then we can come back and cinch everything down. As you can see, as I'm cinching this down, the fabric is being pulled very tight indeed. Now, our backrest and our seat bottom are in position, and it looks great. We showed earlier installing one of these plastic end caps that are rather brittle because it's a little bit old, so we spray it with McLube, and we will spray the opening with McLube as well. This makes it a lot easier to pound it in position without breaking it. Our two-person padded Sling swing is now complete. Coming up next is the materials list and the tools that we used. We did not put down the common household tools that are required for disassembly and assembly of the swing, but we did put down all of the materials that you may need to order from Sailrite. Be sure to check out all of the sling chair fabric that's available at the Sailrite website. For more free videos like this, be sure to check out the Sailrite website or subscribe to the Sailrite YouTube channel. Be sure to click the bell to be notified of new videos when they become available. It is your loyal patronage to Sailrite that makes these free videos available. Thanks for your loyal support. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sailrite, thanks for watching.